The storm hit out of nowhere, with rain hammering down like pebbles on my windshield. I'd been driving a winding back road in the middle of nowhere, my GPS struggling to hold a signal as I inched through the downpour. Suddenly, my car sputtered, and the lights on the dash blinked erratically before the engine died completely. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just me, the rain, and a creeping sense that I was on my own out here. Ahead, I spotted a faint glow through the sheets of rain. I grabbed my jacket and braced myself against the downpour as I stumbled toward the light, a flickering sign that read, "Curiosities and Antiques." The shop seemed to be the only building on this stretch of road, a small, forgotten relic from another time. The windows were dusty, barely letting out any light, but I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The shop was cluttered, every corner filled with mismatched furniture, forgotten artifacts, and relics draped in cobwebs. A bell on the door jingled, and from behind the counter an old man peered at me, his face obscured by shadows. "Help you with something?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My car broke down," I managed, feeling a little foolish under his gaze. "Is there a phone I could use?" He shook his head. "No phone here. Storms cut the lines," he murmured. "You might need to wait it out." His eyes flicked to the back of the shop, where the dim lighting grew even dimmer. "Feel free to look around while you wait." I gave a polite nod and wandered further into the maze of antiques, a little unsure of what I was looking for. But then I saw it. A mirror, half hidden by a dusty velvet cloth. It was massive, nearly my height, with a heavy silver frame carved in intricate patterns. Faces, twisted in agony, mouths open as if frozen in a scream. The frame looked old, like it had been around for centuries, holding stories and secrets it didn't want to share. Something about it made me pause. I couldn't look away. As I leaned in, I noticed that the glass seemed darker somehow, as though shadows were swimming just beneath its surface. I could almost swear I saw movement in there. A flicker, maybe, or the outline of a face hovering somewhere behind my own reflection. "You like that one?" The old man's voice startled me, and I jumped. He had appeared beside me, silent as a ghost. "It's unique," I replied, not wanting to offend him, though a chill had already crawled up my spine. "Where's it from?" He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his gaze shifting from me to the mirror. "They say it came from a family estate. Tragedy struck them hard. Many years ago," he muttered almost to himself. "People talk about seeing things in it, things that shouldn't be there." He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "Best leave it alone." That should have been enough to put me off, but something about the mirror felt like it was calling to me, like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. And when the man offered it to me for a price so low it seemed laughable, I didn't hesitate. I barely remember getting it into my car. It felt like I was in a fog, moving automatically, one step at a time until it was propped up in my living room. Even though the old man's warning echoed in my mind, I couldn't resist. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I couldn't stop glancing at the mirror. The longer I looked, the stranger it seemed. Just as I turned away to head to bed, I caught a flicker of movement in its glass. I froze, my gaze locked onto the mirror's surface. In the dim light of my living room, shadows gathered within the glass like a thick fog. For a moment I thought I was just tired, maybe the play of light from a street lamp outside. But then I saw it again. A definite flicker, like someone moving behind me. I whipped around, expecting, I don't even know what. An intruder? Someone lurking? But there was nothing there, just my silent apartment and the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I laughed at myself, embarrassed even though I was alone, and told myself to relax. It had been a long, strange night. My mind was playing tricks. But the feeling didn't go away. I could almost feel the mirror's presence behind me, an unnerving weight in the room that seemed to stretch its influence to every corner. Finally, I forced myself to get ready for bed, trying to push the image out of my mind. The next morning, I woke up bleary-eyed, that uneasy feeling from the night before still lingering. I convinced myself it was just a strange experience, the broken-down car, the rain, that peculiar shopkeeper with his vague warning. And yet, as I walked past the mirror on my way to the kitchen, I couldn't help but glance at it again. In the daylight, it looked harmless, just an old antique with its heavy silver frame catching the morning sun. That night, though, things changed. As I sat on the couch, half watching a show and half checking my phone, my eyes kept drifting toward the mirror, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure, just on the edge of the reflection. My heart skipped a beat, and I sat up straight, staring at the glass. There, deep within the shadows of the mirror, was a person, a woman, her face pale and twisted in fear. She seemed to be staring right at me, her mouth slightly open as if mid-scream, though no sound escaped. I blinked, shaking my head, but she was still there, her image etched into the dark glass. Slowly, almost in a trance, I moved closer to the mirror. The closer I got, the clearer she became. She wore old-fashioned clothing, the fabric tattered and stained. Her eyes were hollow, and they followed me, unblinking. And then, as I stood inches from the glass, her mouth opened wider, stretching as if in an unnatural scream, though the silence around me remained unbroken. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, and the image flickered, fading into the shadows as if she had never been there. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, every sound in my apartment seeming amplified in the darkness. Over the next few days, the woman appeared in the mirror regularly, her image more vivid each time. Sometimes she was standing close, other times in the distance as if walking down a shadowed hallway that seemed to stretch beyond the mirror's surface. And she wasn't alone. Other faces began to emerge. Men, women, their features twisted with terror, some clutching at their throats, others staring lifelessly as if they'd already given up on escape. By now, I was barely sleeping, the eerie images haunting me both in and out of my dreams. I tried covering the mirror with a cloth, but no matter what I did, I could feel it, pulling at me, as though it was alive, waiting. Every glance I stole at it showed something worse than before. A bruise on someone's face, a faint red stain spreading along the frame. One night, I even heard a faint, strangled whisper calling from somewhere deep within. It was then that I started to wonder if the old man's warning hadn't been for the mirror itself, but for whoever looked into it. By the end of the week, I was on edge, every nerve stretched thin. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of the mirror, but I also couldn't bring myself to stop looking. Every night, the images grew more vivid, and the faces more familiar, like they were people I'd once known but could no longer recognize. The woman with the twisted expression and hollow eyes had become a constant. Each night, she grew closer, her face clearer, details etched as sharply as if she stood beside me. One night I decided I had to know what I was seeing. It was nearly midnight, and a heavy, suffocating silence filled the room as I sat before the mirror, watching. I'd read somewhere that spirits could attach themselves to objects, that sometimes they lingered, trapped by tragedy or anger. As foolish as it felt, I spoke softly, my words barely a whisper in the dead quiet. "Who are you?" I asked. "What do you want?" At first, nothing happened. I began to feel ridiculous, my own reflection staring back at me, alone in the dim light. But then, just as I looked away, something shifted in the glass. The woman appeared again, her face mere inches from mine, her hollow eyes staring straight through me. Her mouth opened, and for the first time I heard her, a hoarse, low whisper that filled the room. "Help me." I stumbled back, my heart racing as her voice echoed, as clear as if she'd spoken right beside me. She was trying to tell me something, but the words were faint, muffled by whatever force held her captive within the mirror. Summoning every bit of courage I had, I forced myself to look into the glass again. Her hand lifted, reaching toward me, and I felt an icy chill spread through the air as if her very presence had leached the warmth from the room. The next night, I dove into researching the mirror. I scoured every source I could find about haunted objects, about mirrors used as conduits for spirits. I even found a few newspaper clippings about the old man's shop. But then I found a photo, blurry and black and white, that stopped me cold. It was the same mirror, unmistakable with its grotesque carvings and tarnished frame, but the date was from decades ago. The article was brief. A tragedy at a large estate, a mansion ravaged by a fire. The owners, a family of 3, were never found, though rumors swirled that they had been killed before the fire even started. Their bodies, the article suggested, had somehow vanished, leaving nothing behind but faint traces of blood in the charred ruins. The mirror had been found intact among the ashes, its surface darkened as though it too had absorbed the horror of that night. A wave of nausea rolled over me. This mirror, the same one sitting in my living room, had witnessed something unspeakable. And the woman I kept seeing, she must have been one of them. The images I was seeing weren't random. They were echoes of what had happened to her and her family. Trapped in that mirror, they were reliving their last moments over and over, desperate for anyone to release them. But even as the truth became clearer, so did the sense that there was something darker here, something the mirror wasn't showing me. I tried everything that night, covering it again, moving it into another room, but nothing worked. Each time I turned around, there it was, waiting for me, a faint hum emanating from it like a heartbeat. That night, I awoke to the sensation of ice-cold fingers brushing against my arm. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was there, at the foot of my bed, though I hadn't moved it. And reflected in its depths, the woman was closer than ever, her lips moving in silent desperation, as though screaming with every ounce of energy she had left. And for the first time, I was no longer sure if she was begging for my help, or warning me to run. I woke the next morning drenched in sweat, with the chill of her touch lingering on my skin like a bruise. The mirror was back in the living room, standing innocently against the wall as though nothing had happened. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. That feeling, the cold pressing into my skin, her face so close I could almost feel her breath. Whatever it was no dream. That day, I reached out to anyone who might have answers. I found a forum online where people discussed paranormal encounters, and I posted about the mirror, sharing every eerie detail. Within hours, my inbox flooded with warnings. "Get rid of it," they said. "Break it. Burn it. Anything. But get it out of your house." One message, though, stood out from the others. It came from someone named Ruth, who claimed to be a paranormal historian. She told me that the mirror couldn't simply be broken. "Destroying a conduit can be dangerous," she wrote. Sometimes it's the only thing holding whatever's inside back. Ruth offered to help me look into the mirror's history, to find a way to safely break the connection. Part of me wanted to refuse her help, to throw the mirror out, let someone else deal with it. But I knew it wouldn't leave me alone that easily. And deep down, I didn't want to leave it. The woman's plea, "Help me," echoed in my mind. I was caught between a strange pity for her and a gnawing fear that I was already in too deep. That night, I sat across from the mirror again. I had my laptop open, Ruth's messages pulled up, her instructions laid out. She had sent a ritual, a way to reach out, to communicate. I was supposed to light a candle, let it burn beside the mirror, and ask whatever was trapped inside to reveal itself more clearly. She warned that the spirit might be unwilling to communicate directly, but that it might offer something, a sign, a hint. Taking a deep breath, I lit the candle and watched the small flame dance in the darkness. Shadows flickered along the mirror surface, growing and stretching like something alive, waiting. My voice sounded thin and strange as I spoke, asking the woman to show herself again, to tell me what she wanted. At first, there was nothing. The room felt thick, the air heavy, as though the whole place was holding its breath. And then, in the depths of the mirror, I saw her. She was standing in what looked like a long, dark hallway. The air around her was filled with smoke, her pale face streaked with soot and fear. Her eyes found mine, and I could feel the weight of her terror pressing against me. Her mouth moved, shaping words that I strained to hear. The fire trapped us. The flame beside me flickered violently, nearly going out. Her eyes widened, and I could see her lifting her hands as if to shield herself. I felt an overwhelming urge to look away, to turn off the light and hide, but I couldn't. I was rooted in place, watching, my heart hammering in my chest. In the mirror, the hallway around her suddenly brightened, flames leaping from the shadows, engulfing the walls, the floor, everything around her. Her face twisted in horror as the fire closed in, consuming her, her hands reaching toward me, desperate. And then, just before the flames swallowed her, she screamed, an unearthly, piercing sound that echoed through the room. The candle went out, plunging the room into darkness. I sat there, paralyzed, unable to shake the feeling that the flames, her terror, her scream, they had been real. Not just a vision, but something I'd felt with every nerve in my body. And in the darkness, I realized with horrifying clarity that whatever had happened to her, whatever had burned her and her family alive, hadn't been an accident. The mirror was more than haunted. It was cursed. And now, I was a part of it. The room felt colder after that night, as if the air had absorbed the memory of her scream. I kept away from the mirror as best I could, but no matter where I went in the apartment, I could feel its pull, hear faint whispers on the edge. I tried to go about my day, telling myself I'd find a way to deal with it, but each night the fear grew stronger. Every time I walked past, I swore I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Small reflections, faces flickering in and out, flashes of fire. The messages from Ruth had gone silent after that last exchange. I couldn't reach her, and my inbox was flooded with half-formed advice and frantic warnings from strangers online. Most told me to destroy it, to break the mirror and end whatever was tied to it, but Ruth's words echoed in my mind. Destroying a conduit can be dangerous. And after seeing the woman in the flames, I believed her. Whatever was trapped in that mirror was dark, twisted. If I shattered it, I had no idea what might be unleashed. Late one night, as I sat on my couch, staring at the mirror from a distance, I noticed something new. At first, it was subtle, a slight fog settling within the glass, like someone breathing against it. But slowly, shapes began to take form, swirling out of the haze. A shadowed doorway, an empty hallway. I recognized it instantly as the same hallway I'd seen before, where the woman had first appeared. And this time, something in me knew it wasn't just an image. It was an invitation. I didn't want to move, but something about the scene called me closer. My legs felt leaden as I rose from the couch, step by step, until I was standing right in front of the mirror. The doorway in the reflection grew larger, more defined, as if pulling me in. And then, without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold, hard glass. Suddenly, I felt a rush of air, like a deep exhale, pulling me forward. I stumbled, hands out, and where I expected to feel the surface of the mirror, there was nothing. Just darkness. Before I knew what was happening, I found myself in the hallway, its walls blackened and covered in soot, the smell of smoke thick in the air. I turned, but the mirror had disappeared, leaving only a vast, stretching corridor dimly lit by a distant, flickering light. My heart pounded as I took a step forward. Shadows danced along the walls, twisted and gnarled, and though I told myself to turn back, there was no sign of an exit. The only way was forward. So I followed the light, each step echoing eerily, until I reached a doorway that looked familiar. The door from the visions I'd seen of the woman. The fire. My hand shook as I turned the handle. Inside, the room was empty, save for a lone figure standing in the corner. It was her, the woman I'd seen, her back turned to me, her outline just barely visible in the dim glow. She didn't move, but I could hear her breathing, raspy and uneven, as though her lungs were still choked with smoke. Why? Am I here? I whispered, my voice breaking the silence. Slowly she turned, and for the first time I saw her face fully. Her eyes were hollow, sunken, yet burning with a desperate, haunting intensity. She reached out, her fingers blackened and charred, and in that hoarse voice she rasped a single word: justice. And as her hand reached for mine, I understood. She didn't want help. She wanted revenge. Her family's deaths hadn't been an accident. Someone had trapped her here, condemned her spirit to an endless fiery purgatory. And now, she wanted me to be the one to find who had done this to her. Or else, I'd be the next one caught in the flames. I jerked my hand back, stumbling into the hallway as her face twisted in fury, her mouth widening in a silent scream. The walls around me flickered, the temperature plummeting as shadows thickened, forming twisted, burning faces in the air. I ran, my feet pounding down the endless hallway as her ghostly wails chased me, growing louder with every step. Just when I thought I'd be swallowed by the dark, I saw the faint outline of the mirror ahead. I lunged forward, hands outstretched, praying I'd make it through. And then I was back, gasping, sprawled on the floor of my living room. The mirror stood before me, silent, its surface dull and empty, but I knew better. She was still there, her fury now part of the shadows etched forever into the glass. And I had a choice. Either I found a way to give her the justice she wanted, or I'd never be free of her wrath.